My name is Mary, and my adopted daughter and her husband pushed me and my husband off a cliff for our inheritance, our property, and our business. My husband didn't survive. I did. And from that moment, my life was never the same. I survived, but I wasn't going to stay quiet. She came into my life when she was very small. Not my blood, but from the moment I saw her, I felt something pull me toward her. Something I can't really explain. Her eyes were wide, curious, innocent, and I knew, somehow, she was mine, not by birth, but by heart. I held her, fed her, tucked her in at night, told her she was my daughter, always my daughter. My husband felt the same. Together, we built a life around her. Every late night, every hard-earned coin, every sleepless moment was for her. We didn't have much at first. My husband started with nothing, and I stood by him through every struggle, every failure. We built our small shop from scratch, worked our hands raw, saved every penny. All of it so she could have a future better than ours, so she could go to school, so she could feel safe in a home we dreamed of giving her. And she smiled. She ran to me after class, hugged me, called me Mom. Those little moments filled the cracks in my heart. I thought I could trust her completely. But things changed. Slowly at first, then all at once. She grew up, and so did her husband's ambitions. We welcomed him, thought maybe he could be family, maybe he'd love her the way we did. But I noticed him, always asking about money, property, the business. His eyes never looked at love, only at what he could take. And she, my daughter, changed with him. Sweet curiosity turned into greed. She demanded expensive things, more money, control. When we tried to guide her, she snapped. She told us we owed her everything. I forgave, kept forgiving, because my heart was too soft, too desperate to believe she would betray us. And then came that day. That day ripped my world apart. We were standing by the cliff, a place we sometimes visited to breathe. The wind was sharp, cold, biting. I held her hand, thinking this was a family moment. My husband stood beside me, smiling, and then it all went wrong. Her eyes met mine. No love, only greed. And then she pushed. She let go of my hand and my husband's. I couldn't save him. His last cry, God, I hear it still, echoed in the hollow where my heart had lived. I hit the rocks, my body shattering with each impact, my vision blurring. When I opened my eyes, he was gone, cold, still, forever. And beside me, I was broken in ways I can't even name. Alone, in pain, I realized the truth. They had planned it. They wanted everything, our home, our business, our life, and they tried to take it by removing us from the way. But that night, lying on jagged rocks, staring at the indifferent stars, I made a promise. If I survived, and I would survive, I would not let them win. I would rise from the blood, the pain, the grief, and I would make them feel the emptiness they left inside me. I whispered his name, my tears and blood mingling, and swore revenge. Patient, calculated. I would make the scales balance again. Because survival was no longer enough. From that night on, it was about justice. And I knew it would be slow, and it would be inevitable. What would you have done if it happened to you? Could you survive that kind of betrayal and wait for the perfect moment to strike? Could you wait? Or would your anger have burned too fast, leaving nothing but ashes in its wake? I waited. When I woke up again, I was in a hospital bed. Tubes in my arms, bandages wrapped tight around my broken body. pain stabbing with every breath. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive. Lucky? Lucky felt bitter on my tongue. My husband wasn't lucky. He was gone, and the people who pushed us off that cliff, the ones I trusted more than my own blood, they were walking free. I couldn't move much. My ribs ached, my head spun, my arms barely obeyed me. But my mind? Sharp as a knife. Every second I replayed that moment. Her eyes, empty of love. His smirk. The way my husband's hands slipped from mine. I wanted to scream, but my voice was weak, drowned by pain. Yet something stronger than pain was growing inside me. A fire that refused to die. Days passed. Nurses came, checked my vitals, brought food, whispered kind words I barely heard. Silence became my companion. Silence and waiting. Waiting for her to walk into that room, to see that I survived, that her plan had failed. And when she finally came, my heart froze. My adopted daughter, tears streaming down her face, acting as if she was worried, holding my hand, whispering, "Mom, thank God you're alive." Beside her, her husband stood, calm, collected, pretending to care. Acting like family, acting like nothing had happened. They thought I was broken. They thought I would crumble, that my fire had been snuffed out by rocks and loss. I stayed silent. I let them act. Let them weave their lies. Their words, "It was just an accident," slid past me like knives that couldn't reach the truth. I remembered everything. Every glance, every subtle plan they had made long before that day. I could wait. I could watch. The funeral was worse than any pain I had felt in my bones. I sat in black, tears falling, and watched her cry for a man she had pushed away. She hugged people, told them she was heartbroken, while her husband held her like a loving partner. Nobody suspected them. Everyone believed the story. And I sat there, silently, letting it all sink in, knowing one day their mask would fall. At night, alone in the darkness of my bedroom, I spoke to my husband in my heart. They took you from me, but I promise I will not let them win. I will not let them enjoy our home, our business, our hard work. I will make them lose everything. I whispered his name over and over, letting the promise burn inside me. My tears dried slowly, but the fire did not. Weeks later, when I returned home, I realized how far they had gone already. They were walking through our house as if it was theirs, touching our things, talking about selling assets, changing the company name, enjoying the luxuries they had dreamed of. They looked at me like I was old, weak, done. But they did not see the truth. My body was healing, my mind was sharp, and every careless move they made only added fuel to the fire in me. I started quietly, slowly, step by step. First, I checked the study at night when they were asleep. Many of our papers were gone, moved into their control. But I was smarter. Years ago, I had made copies. Every land deed, every business agreement, every proof of ownership. Safe, hidden. Their ignorance would be their downfall. Next, I reached out to old workers who had once respected my husband. Not openly, not in front of her or him. I whispered to one loyal manager, "Keep an eye on things. Don't let them know I asked." He agreed, because loyalty to my husband ran deeper than fear of my daughter and her husband. It gave me hope. Then I watched. Every word, every step, every careless boast. They thought I was broken, weak, defeated. They talked freely about selling land, spending money, changing the company. And I listened, memorized, stored it all. Silence became my shield, my mask, my weapon. To the world, I was the grieving widow. To them, I was nothing. But inside, I was alive, and I was planning.
At night, sitting in my husband's chair, I whispered again, "I will not let them win. Just wait. The same way they watched us fall, I will watch them fall too." And I meant it. Every moment of patience was another step closer to the moment when they would realize the ground under them had shifted. What would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have rushed? Would you have screamed, exposed them, tried to fight too soon? Or would you wait, let the world forget, let them grow careless, and then strike when the timing is perfect? I waited, and in that waiting, I felt power return to me. By the time my body had started to heal, my mind was sharper than ever. Every day I moved quietly, unnoticed, while the people who tried to take everything from me grew bolder, more careless. My daughter and her husband thought I was weak. They laughed in the house, planned their trips, spent money freely, and spoke about the business as if it were already theirs. They had no idea the storm I was quietly gathering inside me. I began with small, almost invisible moves. I reached out to my lawyer friend, someone I trusted completely, and showed him the copies of all the papers I had hidden, the deeds, the agreements, the business records. "Keep these safe," I whispered. "One day I will need them." He looked at me with surprise, but he understood. Those papers were my safety net, my shield and my sword all at once. Next, I began planting seeds in the minds of others. Neighbors, old friends, anyone who had seen our life grow from nothing. I spoke carefully, slowly, dropping hints that not everything as it seemed. "Accidents happen," I said, soft and sad. "But sometimes, the way people change afterward, it's strange." I didn't have to say more. Doubt took root on its own. People began to whisper, to look twice, to question the perfect story my daughter and her husband had spun. I turned my attention to the business. I couldn't be there every day, but I had loyal people. Workers who had stood by my husband came quietly to me. I said, "Keep your eyes open. Do not trust everything they say. When the time comes, I'll guide you." They nodded, silent but loyal. Slowly, they began watching the daughter and her husband, noticing mistakes, mismanagement, and greed. And then I struck the first real blow, quietly. One evening, her husband bragged about a business deal he had made, claiming it would earn them a fortune. I stayed silent, pretending to knit, pretending to be weak, but I already knew the deal would fail. From my old manager, I had learned the truth. This great opportunity was nothing but a trap. Days later, when the money was gone and the deal collapsed, I watched them panic. Their faces drained of color. Their arguments began behind closed doors, and I sat there, calm, letting it all unfold. That was the first taste of power, the first bite of the justice I had promised. I didn't stop there. Every day I left small tests in their path. Papers in the wrong places, keys lying where they shouldn't, conversations they overheard just enough to make them suspicious of each other. Each time, they bit the bait, chasing control, chasing power, making mistakes I quietly documented. They thought they were clever. They thought I was defeated. They had no idea that every move, every careless word, every argument was being recorded, stored, remembered. Every crack in their facade was another piece of the net I was weaving around them. At night, I would sit by my husband's photo, whispering the same promise I had made on that cliff. "I have started. Slowly, quietly, but it has begun. They will not know when the ground under them breaks, but it will break. And when it does, they will remember the day they let go of my hand." I asked myself sometimes, in the quiet, what would you have done if you were me? Would you wait in silence? Or would you strike right away? For me, waiting was everything. The slower the revenge, the deeper the pain. And I wanted it to hurt, not just their wallets, but their pride, their reputation, their sense of control. And so, the days of watching, of waiting, of quietly gathering allies and evidence continued. I was patient, methodical, silent. My daughter and her husband believed they had won.
They didn't see the fire that was growing in me, the careful steps I had laid out. They didn't see the storm building in the shadows. And I smiled quietly to myself, knowing that patience was the deadliest weapon of all. By now, my strength was returning. I could walk alone. My hands no longer trembled, and my mind felt sharper than it had ever been. The fire that had ignited the day they pushed us from that cliff had grown into a quiet, burning resolve. Every day I watched them, learning their routines, listening to their boasts, and marking every weakness. They still thought I was the broken widow, helpless and defeated. That was their greatest mistake. I began planting small, carefully calculated seeds of doubt between them. A misplaced receipt here, a note of their private spending left where it could be seen, a casual question dropped into conversation just loud enough to make suspicion bloom. I watched them flinch at each little trap, their smiles growing strained, their easy laughter fading. One evening, my daughter came rushing into the kitchen, fuming about money missing from their account. Her husband glared at her, accusing, shouting, while she fired back with equal force. I sat quietly at the table, pretending to sip tea, watching the scene like a spectator at a play. The sound of their arguments, their frustration, their fear, it was music to my ears. Slowly, silently, the wall between them was cracking. At the same time, I began using my network of loyal workers. I whispered reminders, subtle suggestions, careful guidance. "Remember what we built together," I said quietly to one of them. "Don't let anyone take it for granted." They understood. They remembered my husband's kindness, the years of trust and loyalty. Slowly, they began to distance themselves from my daughter and her husband, refusing to bend to their demands, questioning their decisions, reporting back to me everything I needed to know. Their mistakes multiplied. The husband trusted the wrong people, investing in schemes that collapsed. The daughter blamed him, and he blamed her. Each argument left evidence, whether it was mismanaged accounts, overlooked bills, or poor decisions. I documented everything, quietly, every sound, every paper, every proof of their greed and carelessness. And I made my first public move. In casual conversation with neighbors and friends, I would drop subtle truths, just enough to make them pause and reconsider. "It's strange, isn't it?" I'd say softly. "How quickly people forget who helped them, how easily they believe a perfect story." I never named names, I never accused, but the seed of doubt spread like wildfire. People started to look at them differently, to question their words, to notice the cracks in their perfect facade. Even at home, the tension grew. The daughter would accuse her husband of hiding things, of making poor choices, while he would accuse her of spending recklessly, of being careless. Their once coordinated plans were unraveling, their trust eroding. Every argument, every misunderstanding, every mistake was another step closer to their downfall. At night, I sat with my husband's photo, whispering to him. "They think they are winning. They think I am weak, but every step they take, every misstep, every argument, they are moving into the net I have woven around them. And soon the world will see them as they really are." I knew that patience was everything. I had no need to rush. I had already survived the worst. I had already lost what mattered most, and yet I had everything left to fight for. My revenge was not about quick blows or loud confrontations. It was about letting time do its work, letting their own choices become their chains, letting them destroy themselves while I remained calm, focused, untouchable.
As days turned into weeks, their mistakes piled up, their arguments grew louder, and their pride began to crack. And all the while, I stayed silent, watched, and waited. Because I knew the slower they fell, the harder it would hit them when the truth finally arrived. By this point, I knew that words alone would never be enough. My daughter and her husband had already shown the world a carefully constructed story, a story where I was weak, vulnerable, and broken. No one would believe a grieving mother without proof. So I focused on building evidence. Quiet, meticulous, undeniable. I started with their finances. When they were out, I searched through their papers, their files, and their desk drawers. Bills, bank slips, letters, receipts, all the traces of the luxuries they had claimed as their own. Every car purchase, every jewelry bill, every lavish vacation expense, they thought these things were invisible, hidden from me. But I captured it all. Photos, copies, records. Everything went straight to my lawyer, who began organizing it like a weapon waiting for its moment. Next, I began recording. Not in a brazen way, not with a camera in plain sight, but small, hidden devices. Every time they spoke about selling property, taking from the business, or boasting about our freedom after the accident, I had it captured. Their voices became my proof. Every lie, every betrayal, every brag became something concrete, something that would speak louder than their carefully maintained masks. I also focused on the social side. Respect in our community had always been as valuable as money. I started quietly visiting friends, old neighbors, and former business partners. I didn't accuse them. I didn't shout. I merely hinted at truths. Isn't it strange, I'd say softly, how quickly people forget the ones who built everything for them? I let curiosity and doubt do the rest. Slowly, whispers began to spread. Doubt grew like a shadow creeping over a sunny day. Inside the house, I watched them unravel. I left subtle evidence that would make them suspicious of each other. A misplaced note here, a receipt left where it could be seen, a casual mention of spending or accounts, small things that grew into mistrust. Arguments began behind closed doors, sharp words cutting deeper than any visible mark. And I listened. Every conversation, every raised voice, every moment of fear or guilt, they were pieces of the puzzle I was assembling. And then came the day I realized the final phase had begun. The first cracks in their relationship became visible to others. Friends started to notice. The husband began questioning his wife about money she had spent secretly. The daughter began blaming him for losses he couldn't avoid. Every argument I had quietly nurtured now bore fruit. Their unity, once their strength, was crumbling from within. I was patient. Every step, every moment, I remained calm. My silence became my armor. They could not see me plotting. They could not see me moving the pieces into place. To them, I was still the broken widow, the woman left behind. But in truth, I was a storm gathering power, a mind working with precision, a heart burning with quiet, controlled fire. At night, I sat with my husband's photo, whispering to him, "They think they have taken everything, but the truth is coming. Every lie, every betrayal, every greedy act will be exposed, and when it is, they will understand exactly what it feels like to be powerless, to be watched, to have nothing." And with every day that passed, their world became weaker, more fragile, more exposed. They were building their own prison, and I was holding the key. The day was coming. I could feel it in every breath, every heartbeat. The court date was set, the evidence ready, and the storm I had been quietly building was about to hit its mark. But I did not rush. I had learned that patience was everything. I spent my mornings reviewing the files, the recordings, the bank statements. Every signature, every document, every conversation had to be flawless. One small mistake and everything I had built could crumble. My daughter and her husband continued to live in their false sense of security. They spoke openly about the business, laughed about how we finally have control, and planned their next purchases. They had no idea that every boast, every careless word had been captured, recorded, and documented. Every action they took had been another step deeper into the trap I had set.
I prepared myself mentally as well. I knew the courtroom would be filled with people they had charmed, people who would expect me to be weak, confused, and emotional. I would have to be the opposite: calm, steady, unshakable. I spent hours practicing, not words, but presence. I had to be unshakable. At night, I would sit with my husband's photo, lighting a candle, whispering to him, "We are ready. Soon, the world will see what they are truly like. They tried to take everything, but the truth is coming. Every lie, every betrayal, every greedy act will be exposed. And when it is, they will understand exactly what it feels like to be powerless, to be watched, to have nothing."
And with every day that passed, their world became weaker, more fragile, more exposed. They were building their own prison, and I was holding the key. The day was coming. I could feel it in every breath, every heartbeat. The court date was set, the evidence ready, and the storm I had been quietly building was about to hit its mark. But I did not rush. I had learned that patience was everything. I spent my mornings reviewing the files, the recordings, the bank statements. Every signature, every document, every conversation had to be flawless. One small mistake, and everything I had built could crumble. My daughter and her husband continued to live in their false sense of security. They spoke openly about the business, laughed about how we finally have control, and planned their next purchases. They had no idea that every boast, every careless word had been captured, recorded, and documented. Every action they took had been another step deeper into the trap I had set. I prepared myself mentally as well. I knew the courtroom would be filled with people they had charmed, people who would expect me to be weak, confused, and emotional. I would have to be the opposite: calm, steady, unwavering. I spent hours practicing, not words, but presence. I had to be unshakable. At night, I would sit with my husband's photo, lighting a candle, whispering to him, "We are ready. Soon, the world will see what they are truly like. They tried to take everything, but they cannot take the truth." I could feel his presence, steady and comforting, like the hand I would have held had he survived. I also made sure to reinforce my allies. The loyal workers, old friends, and my lawyer were all on alert. Everyone knew their role. Everyone knew the timing. No detail was too small. Every witness, every document, every recording had been double-checked, stored safely, and rehearsed. I had built a network strong enough to withstand their lies and deception. Meanwhile, at home, the cracks in their relationship continued to grow. The husband had begun questioning his wife more openly, asking about money she had spent, blaming her for missteps in the business. She, in turn, shouted, accused, and begged him to trust her. Their arguments grew louder, their tension more visible. And I watched, silently, knowing that each fracture brought them closer to the collapse I had envisioned. The night before the court date, I could barely sleep. I lay in bed, thinking of the cliff, thinking of that moment when their greed and betrayal had taken my husband from me. I remembered the pain, the fear, the helplessness, but I also felt the fire inside me, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that this time, I had the power. They were the ones who would be exposed, the ones who would feel powerless, the ones who would face justice.
And in the early hours of the morning, I whispered once more to his photo, "This is it. The time has come. Every lie, every betrayal, every step they took to steal from us, they will see it laid bare. And when they do, they will understand exactly what it means to have nothing, not just money, not just respect, but everything they believed they could take from us." By the time I stepped into the courtroom, I was ready. My daughter and her husband stood there, sharp suits, fake smiles, thinking they could intimidate me with their presence. But I walked slowly, deliberately, carrying my bag of evidence, my head high, my heart steady. I had survived the cliff, survived betrayal, survived grief, and now I was about to witness the world recognize their true faces. The room fell silent when the judge entered. Papers shuffled, whispers died, and all eyes turned to us. My lawyer stood by my side, calm and precise. Their lawyer tried to radiate confidence, speaking first, portraying them as loving children, loyal partners, victims of circumstance. But I knew the truth, and soon everyone else would too. As the case began, I remained calm, watching every reaction, noting every tremor, every flinch, every shadow of doubt. My daughter's smile faltered. Her husband's hands clenched tightly under the table, and I knew, deep inside, that the net I had patiently woven over months was finally closing. The courtroom was tense, every eye fixed on the front where we stood. My daughter and her husband radiated false confidence, their smiles rigid, their posture rigid with pretense. They thought they could face me with lies and charm, that no one would question them. But I had prepared for this. Every paper, every recording, every shred of evidence was a thread in the net I had spent months weaving, and now it was time for the trap to tighten. The judge called the case to order. Their lawyer began with a rehearsed narrative, painting them as innocent, caring, and wronged by circumstance. He spoke of me as if I were confused, vulnerable, weak, still grieving my husband, and incapable of handling business matters. Every word was meant to cut at my credibility, to make me seem fragile and unreliable. But I remained calm, my hands folded, my gaze steady, my mind focused. When my lawyer spoke, the room shifted. He laid the foundation of the case with precision, presenting the original business papers, the signed property documents, the legal proof that everything remained in my name. He explained that despite their assumptions, the land, the business, and the house were legally mine, that no transfer had occurred without my knowledge or consent. Then came the recordings. The sound of my daughter's voice, laughing about the accident and how it cleared the way, played through the courtroom speakers. I watched as her face turned pale, her carefully constructed mask faltering. Her husband's confident posture collapsed slightly as his own voice followed, boasting about selling land and enjoying luxuries that were never rightfully theirs. Their smiles faded, eyes darting, hands trembling under the table. The weight of their own words hit harder than any accusation I could have made. I remained seated, calm as stone, while the courtroom murmured. Witnesses, neighbors, and friends who had once been charmed by their outward appearances now looked at them differently. The room that had felt heavy with tension now buzzed with realization. They were hearing the truth in the voices of the very people who had betrayed trust, laid bare for all to see.
Next came the financial evidence. Receipts, bank slips, and letters documenting the money they had misappropriated. Every luxury they had indulged in at the expense of the business and our legacy were presented carefully. The judge flipped through them, shaking his head. Their lawyers stumbled, trying to explain away each document, each transaction, but the truth was louder than any argument. I could feel their fear, the panic beginning to settle in. My daughter glanced at me, eyes wide, lips pressed tight, realizing the reality that months of preparation and patience had finally forced into the light. Her husband's fists clenched and unclenched under the table, the rigid posture replaced by tension, his arrogance melting into a mix of shame and fear. I did not need to speak. My calm presence, the steady assurance in my lawyer's presentation, and the undeniable evidence did everything for me. The courtroom had become a stage, and the actors they had always been, the deceitful, greedy faces I had once loved, were now exposed for all to see. When the judge finally began to speak, his voice was firm and deliberate. He confirmed that all property,
Land and business rights remained in my name. He ordered an investigation into the misuse of company funds and froze their accounts until the matter was resolved. Their world, built on lies and greed, began to crumble in that moment. I remained seated, hands folded, calm and composed. Inside, my heart roared, but outside, I was stillness itself. I watched as their carefully curated lives shattered before them, not with violence, not with shouting, but with the undeniable weight of truth. And I whispered quietly, my eyes on my husband's photo, "This is only the beginning. They will see everything unravel, and there will be no escape. Justice is here, and truth has finally found them." After the courtroom, life outside began to change in ways I anticipated. The evidence in the judge's ruling were only the first step. The real weight of their downfall would come from the people around them, the community that had once admired them, the friends and neighbors who had believed in their charm and smiles. I had known all along that social respect is as fragile as glass. Once cracked, it can never be fully restored. Almost immediately, the whispers began. Neighbors who had once greeted my daughter and her husband warmly now offered hesitant smiles or avoided eye contact entirely. At the local market, shopkeepers who had once bowed politely to them now treated them with cool indifference. "Mary's family built this business from nothing," someone would murmur under their breath. "These two, they're just living off someone else's work." Each whispered word was a chisel, quietly carving away at the image they had constructed over years. Their arrogance and confidence, which had once made them untouchable, began to falter. My daughter tried to project strength, walking through the streets with her head held high, but the weight of every judgmental glance, every suspicious whisper, followed her like a shadow. She stopped inviting friends over, stopped attending gatherings, and her once bright laughter was replaced by a tense, forced smile. Her husband fared no better. He had once dominated conversations with arrogance and charm, but now, people who had once deferred to him ignored him entirely. Doors closed, opportunities vanished, and he found himself isolated, powerless. Inside the house, the tension grew unbearable. I could hear their arguments from the corner of my own home, walls no longer a shield, but a thin membrane through which their fear and frustration seeped. My daughter shouted, "Why is everyone against us? I've done everything we were supposed to do." And her husband snapped back, "Everything? You mean everything you took for yourself? Maybe if your mother hadn't survived, we wouldn't be facing this." Their words echoed through the house like a symphony of their own undoing. I sat quietly in the living room, pretending to read, listening, and savoring the slow burn of justice.
At the same time, old workers and loyal friends began to return. Men who had once been sidelined or ignored because of her arrogance now sought my guidance. One by one, they approached me quietly, whispering their willingness to work under my leadership again. Business partners, too, started returning calls, once hesitant or angry, now eager to re-establish ties with the person they knew had built this empire honestly. The tables were turning, slowly, methodically. The house that had once been theirs became a prison of isolation, while I reclaimed not only what was mine, but the respect and trust that had been stolen from us. Every day brought a new layer of humiliation for them. Invitations to social events dwindled. When they attempted to host gatherings, few attended, and those who did were polite but distant. They had once believed they could manipulate perception, but perception is a fragile currency. It cannot be bought with lies, and it cannot survive when truth spreads. And then came the small, almost poetic victories. I would occasionally leave a letter, a note, or even just a subtle conversation hinting at the truth. Nothing direct, nothing overt, just enough for friends or acquaintances to connect the dots themselves.
A whispered word to one neighbor about their careless spending here. A casual remark to another about the accident story there. Slowly, like dominoes tipping over, their credibility in the community collapsed. People who had once smiled at them now gave them looks of pity, suspicion, and sometimes barely concealed contempt. At home, the cracks in their marriage widened. My daughter began to blame her husband for mistakes she herself had orchestrated or exaggerated. Her husband, in turn, grew bitter, snapping at her for even the smallest perceived misstep. Their home became a battlefield, the walls echoing with anger, resentment, and despair. They had built their life on greed, and now the very greed that had guided their actions was consuming them from within. I, meanwhile, continued my life quietly, calmly, deliberately. I rebuilt the business with integrity and patience, welcoming back those who had stayed loyal to my husband and me. The property was secure, the employees loyal, and the respect of the community returned. But I did not gloat. I did not taunt. I simply let the world witness their unraveling while I worked quietly, steadily, and with purpose. One evening, I stood by the window, watering the plants, listening to the silence that now permeated their side of the house. My daughter and her husband had retreated into themselves, their laughter gone, their arguments muffled by shame and frustration. I could see them through the faint glow of the streetlights, pacing the rooms, arguing in hushed tones, trying to salvage the pieces of a life they had shattered. And I felt a calm satisfaction unlike anything else, a quiet victory that required no celebration, no applause, only the satisfaction of watching justice unfold naturally. Sometimes I would catch myself thinking about the cliff, about that day when their greed had pushed us into the abyss. I had survived, broken but unbowed. They had thought they had won, that life had handed them everything on a silver platter. But life, it seemed, had a different way of balancing the scales. I had not struck them directly. I had not shouted or railed. I had allowed patience, observation, and careful strategy to work like a clockwork, and now the hands of justice were moving at their pace, precise and inevitable. And through it all, I continued to whisper to my husband's photo, lighting a candle every evening. They believed they could take everything. They believed they could erase us. But they are the ones who have lost everything. Their pride, their respect, their unity, they are all gone. And we are still here.
The days following the courtroom felt like a slow dawn breaking after a long, harsh night. The judgment had been delivered, and the legal documents had cemented my ownership of the business, the property, and the legacy my husband and I had built together. But legal papers alone do not restore what was stolen. They do not repair the fractures in trust, the wounds left by betrayal, or the respect that must be earned back. That was my next step, quiet but deliberate, and I knew the power of perception was as strong as the power of law. I began reconnecting with the community slowly, steadily. Old friends, business partners, and neighbors who had remained loyal began returning calls, sending messages, and visiting quietly to check on me. Each conversation was measured. I spoke with calmness and sincerity, never gloating, never boasting, only planting the seeds of truth and letting them grow naturally. The whispers of doubt about my daughter and her husband became conversations of caution, and soon those conversations became open warnings to anyone considering doing business with them. Meanwhile, the duo themselves were unraveling under the weight of isolation. They tried to appear confident in public, but their efforts were hollow. Invitations were refused politely,
Friendships became distant, and the small gatherings they attempted to host ended in awkward silences and empty chairs. They had built their life on deception, and now that same deception had become a cage. Every step they took seemed to pull them deeper into fear and regret. I watched it happen without interference, letting the slow but inexorable collapse of their world be their own doing. Inside the house, their arguments became louder, sharper, more desperate. I could hear them pacing at night, shouting at each other over trivial matters that would have been nothing before the fall. My daughter accused her husband of hiding money, of being careless, and of betraying her trust. He accused her of reckless spending and of failing to protect what they thought they had earned. The walls trembled with their anger, and sometimes I caught the sound of objects breaking, the echo of shattered pride. I sat in my quiet corner, observing, knowing that the collapse of their unity was as important as any court ruling. I also focused on securing my business fully. Workers returned, loyal and respectful, ready to help rebuild what had been shaken. Accounts were reviewed, operations streamlined, and the company regained its stability. I maintained a calm presence, guiding with quiet authority, earning the loyalty of those who had once feared change. Slowly, the heartbeat of the business returned, steady and strong, while their attempts to exert control outside crumbled. I began letting small, deliberate reminders of their failures surface in social settings. A neighbor would ask casually about the family, and I would respond with measured honesty. They've made mistakes. It's a hard lesson, but sometimes people realize the cost of greed too late. Nothing more, nothing accusatory, just enough for the truth to be noticed. The gossip spread naturally, organically, and I never had to speak directly of betrayal or revenge. Their reputation eroded quietly, irrevocably, as the community slowly turned away from them. The final blow was watching the disintegration of their marriage. The tension in the house became palpable, thick, and suffocating. They no longer trusted each other. Their communication reduced to arguments over trivial matters and bitter silence in shared rooms. They had once believed their union was a fortress, but it had been built on shared greed and deceit. Now, that same foundation crumbled beneath them, leaving only frustration, blame, and the quiet ache of loss. I did not interfere. I simply observed, a silent witness to the consequences of their own choices. At night, I returned to the ritual I had kept for months. I lit a candle before my husband's photo, watching the flicker cast shadows across the room. "We are still here," I whispered softly. "We survived. Our work, our life, our love, it all remains intact. They thought we could erase us, but it is their own actions that have undone them." And I allowed myself a moment of reflection. I thought about the cliff, that sudden moment when everything changed. I remembered the fear, the pain, the helplessness, and the anger that had threatened to consume me. But through patience, strategy, and careful observation, I had turned that moment of devastation into a story of quiet, undeniable justice. I had survived what was meant to end me, and in the process, I had ensured that the people who betrayed us could not recover. As the days went on, the household they once dominated became increasingly quiet, filled with tension and regret. Their wealth was still present, but it was meaningless without respect, loyalty, or peace. Opportunities vanished, friendships disappeared, and their isolation became complete. Every misstep, every argument, every moment of distrust reinforced the lesson that actions have consequences, and theirs had caught up to them. I realized, in that quiet observation, that revenge does not always roar. It often whispers, and those whispers grow louder until the consequences are undeniable. I had chosen patience over anger, strategy over chaos, and the results spoke louder than any act of confrontation could have. I sat alone one evening, candlelight flickering, feeling a quiet sense of victory, not in malice, but in justice restored. I had regained everything that had been threatened: my home, my business, my community, and most importantly, my sense of dignity. I had turned survival into empowerment, betrayal into lessons, and fear into careful, controlled action. I whispered one final time to my husband's photo, a mix of reverence and relief in my voice. We endured. We were tested. And now, those who tried to take everything from us have nothing left. Our life, our work, our love, it remains. They cannot undo it. They cannot touch it. And we are still here. At last, the chaos, the scheming, the betrayals, all of it had settled into a quiet, undeniable truth. Their downfall was complete. The house that had once been filled with their laughter, arrogance, and false confidence now echoed with silence, tension, and regret. The business was back under my hands, thriving again, with loyal employees, reliable partners, and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since before the cliff. But more than money, more than property, more than revenge, it was the restoration of dignity and peace that filled me. Every day I watched them retreat into themselves. My daughter walked through the house with her head low, speaking only when necessary, her voice trembling with hesitation. Her husband barely raised his eyes, his pride shattered, his arrogance replaced by caution and fear. They lived together under the same roof, yet their bond had dissolved into something fragile, brittle, and empty. And I, calm, measured, patient, stood apart from their collapse, a witness to the truth finally catching up to them. Some might say revenge is about anger, about fire and confrontation, about immediate satisfaction. But what I learned is that true revenge, the kind that leaves a permanent mark, does not need to roar. It whispers. It waits. It builds quietly until the world itself conspires to reveal the consequences of the betrayal. Every mistrusted glance, every broken relationship, every closed door and failed opportunity, they were all echoes of the choices my daughter and her husband made, and I had only held the mirror. At night I continued my ritual, lighting the candle by my husband's photo. The flickering flame reflected in his eyes, in my heart, reminding me of what I had lost, what I had endured, and what I had reclaimed. We survived. We endured. Our life's work, our love, our integrity, they remain untouched. And they, those who tried to erase us, have nothing left.
I reflected on the cliff, on that moment when our world had flipped upside down in the blink of an eye. Fear had gripped me then, pain had consumed me, and the world had seemed to crumble around me. But survival had taught me something deeper than fear. It had taught me patience, observation, and the power of calculated, quiet strength. It had taught me that even in the darkest moments, a mind sharpened by love, loss, and determination could orchestrate justice in ways that anger and impulsiveness never could. Their faces still haunted the edges of my mind, not because I feared them, but because I had witnessed firsthand the consequences of choices made in greed, arrogance, and betrayal. I had once loved my daughter like my own blood, had given her everything: home, care, guidance, and unwavering trust. And yet, when faced with the promise of inheritance, she had let go of all love, all loyalty, and had tried to claim it through treachery. Watching her and her husband crumble was not joy, it was the natural return of balance, the universe correcting itself, and I was there to observe with quiet resolve. I began to embrace life again,
The mornings felt warmer, the sunlight brighter, and the world richer in small, meaningful details. I walked through the business, spoke to my employees, met neighbors, and carried the quiet confidence of someone who had survived catastrophe and emerged stronger. My days were no longer clouded by fear, by pain, or by betrayal. They were filled with work, purpose, and a peace that came from knowing that the people who had sought to take everything from me now had nothing but regret, isolation, and the bitter taste of their own choices. I sometimes asked myself, what would anyone else have done in my place? Would they have rushed, shouted, or struck in anger? Or would they have waited, observed, and let time itself dismantle the house built on lies? The answer is different for everyone, but for me, patience had been the most powerful weapon. Every carefully placed observation, every quiet step, every subtle hint to the right people at the right time had created a cascade of consequences far stronger than immediate confrontation ever could. And so, the story finds its quiet close. My daughter and her husband live in the same house, under the same roof, yet their world is broken in ways that cannot be repaired. They have wealth, but it brings them no peace. They have proximity, but no connection. They have survival, but no dignity. Meanwhile, I have reclaimed everything that was taken from me: my home, my business, my honor, and my inner strength. I live with the knowledge that justice has been served, not with malice, but with patience and wisdom. Every night I light a candle for my husband, for our life together, and for the future I have rebuilt. We were not defeated. We endured. We preserved what matters. And those who sought to take everything, they now live with the consequences. The flame flickers in the quiet, and I feel him near me, proud, at peace, and watching over what we built together. Revenge is not a roar. It is a quiet, unwavering force that unfolds with time. It is justice in motion, patience in action, and truth revealed. I, Mary, survived the worst betrayal imaginable, endured the loss of my beloved husband, and turned devastation into triumph. I did not destroy them with my own hands. Their choices did that. But I ensured that the consequences reached them fully, irrevocably, and in a way that restored balance and dignity. And in that knowledge, I finally found peace. And that's my story. Thank you for listening, for staying with me through every moment of pain, betrayal, and finally, justice. I hope it gave you something to think about patience, resilience, and standing strong when life pushes you to the edge. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? I read every comment, and your support truly means the world. And remember, no matter what challenges life throws your way, stay strong, stay patient, and never let anyone take away your peace. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.